Hello and welcome. I'm Megan Moeller, a productivity enthusiast here at ActivTrak, and your session guide of sorts for today. With that in mind, let's go ahead and turn to just a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's session and we will send it out in the next day or so once we have everything ready for you. We may have time for questions today, so if you do, please go ahead and ask as we go along. You can put them in the Q&A below. If you look along the bottom nav, you should see a Q&A button. Just click on that and you can ask your question or even share comments. I'll be in the background as our presenters, as our guests are going to be talking through things today. So I always love and appreciate the feedback and the conversations we have in the background and all of that kind of stuff. So really excited to, get to those questions if we have time and to see your comments and feedback. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn to today's session. Welcome to Maximizing Workforce ROI, Lessons from Parts ASAP and ActivTrak with John Frazier and Gabriela Mauch. I'd like to invite both of them to come on as I give them a proper introduction. Hey, John. Hey, Gabriela. John Frazier is a results-driven executive with over 25 years of leadership experience in scaling organizations, driving operational excellence, and executing M&A strategies that maximize enterprise value. With a deep understanding of P&L management, market expansion, and private equity-backed growth, he's led businesses through strategic transformations that deliver sustained profitability and competitive market positioning. Currently, he serves as Chief Operating Officer at Parts ASAP, where he drives enterprise-wide business strategy, operations, sales, marketing, e-commerce, and digital transformation. Under his leadership, they scaled revenue to $379 million, executed 23 acquisitions, and expanded EBITDA multiples from 5 to 8x to 12x through operational synergies and commercial alignment. He's responsible for all the company's commercial lines of business. Beyond financial growth, John is passionate about building high-performance teams and cultivating a people-first culture that fosters innovation, accountability, and operational agility. He thrives at the intersection of technology, operations, and sales, where he develops and implements scalable business strategies to drive efficiency, customer engagement, and long-term value creation. That is quite the role, John, I have to say. And many of you in our audience are likely very familiar with Gabriela Mauch, who's our Chief Customer Officer and head of our Productivity Lab. She's responsible for driving customer value across all of our customers. She oversees the company's world-class productivity thought leadership team and champions delivering value every step of the way, from pre-sales through becoming a customer. An expert in effectiveness, leadership, and organizational design, Gabriela spent the past decade helping organizations build outcome-oriented, performance-driven teams. Her previous roles include directing the launch of McDonald's Effectiveness and Leadership Center of Excellence, as well as positions at human capital and strategy consulting firms McKinsey & Company and KPMG. And with that, I will turn it over to our awesome presenters today. Gabriela, do you want to go ahead and kick us off with the conversation?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Megan. Next time I'll have to ask you to read my bio before John, so I don't have to follow it.
Will do, noted.
Thank you everyone for joining. We're excited to host this session. This session is on the heels of a previous session where we're really looking to make sure that we can bring in our customers who have just done tremendous things with ActivTrak. And John and the Parts ASAP team have done just that. And so I'm excited for this discussion, and I'm excited for another perspective on how ActivTrak has provided value to a company as progressive as John's. So with that, John, I'd hate to give the Parts ASAP overview, myself, and would love for you to kind of give the audience a flavor for what Parts ASAP is and your current set of use cases and sort of overview of your partnership with ActivTrak.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for the warm welcome. I'm very passionate and excited to be here today. So please, ask any and all questions. I'll try to be brief and get straight to the point on this so we can address any real-time questions you might have. What is Parts ASAP? We are a collection of companies that serve new, aftermarket, and used parts for ag, construction, and material handling. So if it is not on the road, we want to be that part supplier for them. And we've done that through a myriad of organic growth as well as merger and acquisition. Right now, we're about 650 employees. We've consolidated down to 20 locations. And when COVID struck, and we had the opportunity to allow people to continue to work from home to support the needs of the business, we saw that as an opportunity to really support the idea of working from home. And what drove us to a tool like ActivTrak in this case was to support the culture or the shift of the workplace while still having some of that accountability for the obvious positions like sales. And then I'll say some of the less obvious positions that are a little harder to manage, like the back office roles where you don't have the same ROI there. Oh, Gabriela, I think you're on mute.
I muted myself. Fantastic. And I'm going to want to dig into that a little bit more because I think a lot of our customers have that question, right? I've got some more typically metricated roles than I have others. You've managed to use ActivTrak for both. Before we dive into that, though, I want to take you back to the early stages of our partnership. In fact, earlier, before it even started, right? I'd be curious to hear from you. What started that workforce analytics curiosity for you? Did you already have workforce analytics in place? Had you caught wind of some sort of productivity type solution? If I can take you back to 2 years ago when you came upon ActivTrak, what made you think that this might be the right way or the best way to solve some of these question marks that you had?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, it was more about building confidence in our direction and creating clarity for the organization in terms of what are we going to do, not just short term, but long term. And so we needed data. One of our core values of the organization is that we trust data rather than intuition. And that means having data for all of our decision making. And part of that is making sure that we're making the right calls with our employees and productivity, making sure that people are doing their job, doing it appropriately, mitigating risk for us, and then also making sure that people aren't overworking and overburdening themselves. You know, sometimes you have those high flyers in your organization that are working those 70, 80 hours a week. You don't always know that that's happening. And a productivity tool like ActivTrak also helps us find those people that are burning out, and we need to properly reallocate those resources accordingly.
Excellent. Yeah, and that's honestly that's one of my favorite use cases, right? I think, the ability to understand where you are stretching those resources too thin can have such a positive impact on the overall culture and take, sentiment of the workforce. Let's dig a little bit deeper. I think, that's helpful understanding of sort of what brought you over the threshold, and you had this need, right, for more data, the right data, and data that you could trust. And then you had a workforce, which, as you alluded to at the onset, in which some parts of your workforce were very used to being measured by this type of data, and other parts of your workforce maybe not so much. And so can you talk us through who you use, what your audience is for ActivTrak today, and maybe kind of give us a tour of the different types of workers and how you leverage their existing KPIs and maybe have thought of new KPIs in terms of measuring them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a very large sales team, and with sales teams, it's really easy to see whether or not they're hitting their productivity standards. You can see the number of calls they make, you can see the number of quotes they're producing, you can see the conversion rate, and it ultimately drops to revenue. It becomes much harder when you're measuring some of these, I'll call them back office or functional roles, accounts payable, developers, marketers, graphic designers. There's an opportunity that we have that says you can't just base it on the number of invoices they clear, because some invoices are simple and some are really complex. You can't do it based on the number of lines of code that they write, because the number of lines that they write has very little to do with the amount of business value that a developer is bringing to the organization. So how do you do it? You can do it by looking at the amount of productive time that they're spending in their workday, making sure that they're not spending too much time, and also making sure that the time that they are spending is not only productive, but safe and secure for the environment. Are people going to websites to watch movies? Are they going to websites like ChatGPT and cutting and pasting our data into these systems that are now training AI models out there. These are real problems that we have where we want to protect our intellectual property and we want to be able to have insight into some of those metrics. So we're looking at things like productive time versus unproductive time. Later in our use case, we've migrated a bit to being able to understand the number of hours that roles that should be in front of a computer all day, every day, are actually in doing that work, and it's matching up to the amount of time that they have. So for example, if you're an hourly employee and you're working 40 hours a week, are you working 60 hours a week on your computer? That is just as much of an issue for organizations as somebody that's charging you for 40 and working 20. And so you're looking for those opportunities to load balance and make credit for the work that they're doing and making sure that you're reallocating that labor to make sure that you're spreading the wealth, especially when you start to have larger teams and you have a remote workforce. That makes it a little bit harder when you can't just walk over to their desk to see what they're doing.
That makes a lot of sense. And you said something that I wanted to pick at a little bit, because I think that sometimes, there's this sensitivity to, well, is ActivTrak really just going to help me? Do I really want managers looking and seeing if people are watching movies all day, right? It seems like a big solution for that type of use case. And one of the things that I know that the Parts ASAP team managed to do was to decrease that type of unproductive work pretty extensively. But you did so in a way that I really admired, which was you didn't distract the whole management team with looking at that non-productive time. Can you share a little bit more from your experience how you allowed this to be a mechanism to reduce that unproductive time without jeopardizing the flexibility that you're okay if someone decides to check something personal, and B, that it didn't become a distraction to the broader use cases that certainly drive more business improvement?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Look, with this type of data comes a great deal of responsibility, and if the data is there, it can be distracting to an organization. So even though this might not be the intended use case for ActivTrak, what we've done is we've really abstracted all managers across the entire organization from the nitty-gritty details of what ActivTrak has the capability to give us. And instead, we abstracted managers and even managers of managers and VPs from that. And instead, what we really focused on is, are there people in the organization that are burning more than, say, 20% of the number of hours that we're expecting them to burn on their computer? Are people spending more than 15% of their time on their computer doing something that's unproductive or visiting websites that we would prefer they don't visit because there's potential for data exfiltration, AI model training, those types of activities? And then a simple report goes out with nothing more than a name, the amount of unproductive time or overproductive time that they've had, and the type of activities that they're working on. And it's up to the manager from there to take next steps. We're intentionally making sure that those managers aren't fixated on finding that 10 minutes, finding that 15 minutes, making sure that somebody that did 41.2 hours of overtime worked exactly 41.2. That will drive your business mad. And really what we want to focus on is serving the customers. And if somebody wants to take a break and go to YouTube and check out that video, great. If they want to go to Facebook, great. If they want to go to other websites that could be dangerous for data exfiltration or others, that's where we want to put some stops in place. Or if somebody's spending 4 hours a day watching Netflix, yeah, those use cases exist, and we have those conversations. But it's intentionally abstracted to really focus on what is going to give us the biggest lift in the organization, not individually trying to sort of excise people from the organization.
Yeah, I love that, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think what I've watched you all do, along with a number of others, is set thresholds and build a signal, right? So then you know when to look, but that you're not looking at everything. And I think that that's such an important part of not only seeing the forest from the trees and the ability to make decisions on the bigger signals, but also sustaining that trust with your workforce so that you're not looking at every single detail. Let's talk a little bit about what else you do with the data in terms of coaching, right? I mean, one of the big value propositions, here at ActivTrak is that we want to be able to equip your manager with the visibility they need to properly coach the workforce on maybe things that they could be doing that are more efficient, better ways that they can have work habits. Talk to me a little bit about how you've managed to empower your managers to leverage the insights to coach their workforce.
Yeah, perfect. Here's a fun statistic, and this varies a little bit month to month, but roughly 80% of the people that find themselves on a list for a conversation are coached back to meeting expectations and ultimately becoming productive. So think of it that way. For every 5 people that make the list, 4 people, we have a courageous conversation with them. They redirect their behavior. We get them additional training if needed. We show them tips and tricks on how to stay productive during their day, and they become, largely contributing members of our workforce. And of course, you have the exceptions to that rule, but it truly is an exception where 1 out of 5, end up taking a different direction with us. But the idea is that we never want to use this as, say, a weapon or a tool. We use it as an indicator for a conversation. And then from there, we have the data that helps us understand, is this somebody that's just context switching constantly? And maybe it's something as simple as they accidentally enabled a notification that is popping up every 5 seconds about the latest Facebook update that they have. Maybe it's something where they're spending a little too much time in their email and they need to spend more time in the CRM making the sales calls. These are the types of activities that we can look at that data and say, okay, here's what we want you to do different. And by and large, people want to respond. In this work from home methodology, you have pets, you have kids, you have the laundry that needs to be done, you have that lunch that just goes a little bit long. Like, even the best employees can sometimes get distracted by what's happening around us. Like, it's hard for me not to see, the people through the door right now on the other side of this camera, and it's like distracting what's happening. It happens to all of us. So how do we help people understand that behavior and then course correct it if it's something that becomes a large problem on the scale of, say, 15-20% of their time?
Mm-hmm. One of the things I love as I listen to you talk, John, is what comes across so clearly is the intent, right? And given the success that the Parts ASAP team has had, my assumption is that that intent is mirrored across your leadership team, right? And it's this real belief that, there are opportunities to improve, but the person who needs to improve isn't necessarily a person who doesn't care or that is disengaged or isn't trying their best, right? And it's something that I admire so much about you that I, like I said, suspect translates to your leadership team. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had the success that you've had in having your workforce be so receptive to this. And so I just, kudos to you and to acknowledge that. Let's talk a little bit about ROI, right? I mean, customers are constantly asking, how do you measure the ROI of something like this? I get that it's a coaching tool. I get that, ultimately you've got people maybe spending less time on Facebook. But when you roll this whole story up to your leadership team and to your peers, how do you look at ActivTrak's ROI, and how have you thought about quantifying it?
Yeah, really after about 1 quarter, and again, our use case has evolved over time, but the initial use case was simply to redirection or needed help finding productive time in their day, and frankly, making sure that our computers were safe, making sure that we didn't have data exfiltration. So the obvious one for us is frankly just being transparent with the organization that we're rolling out this type of tool, and that we're able to see those large generalization of, hey, this is a work computer, we're paying you to do work stuff, and we want to see that work activity done. That communication alone generated an increase in productivity. We were able to measure it almost immediately within the tool as we rolled it out. And then even within 1 quarter, we saw a 5, 10, 15% increase in productive time, simply because people said, gosh, that's a really good reminder. I probably need to make sure that I'm doing my lunch on my lunchtime, and that, that quick laundry swap that turns into 10 minutes of folding, that's probably best to do on my break time, or it's best to do during my lunch period. So just the active and open, transparent communication with employees, with even, I'll say standard or even high achieving employees, we saw an overall increase in productivity. On top of that, then you saw people that were, I'll say, on the lower side of productivity or on the higher side of productivity, and we were able to load balance and find out what was happening with their time and what do we need to do different. In some cases, we added resources. In some cases, we realized that people weren't busy and maybe they weren't raising their hand for more help, but that wasn't necessarily their fault either. Like our responsibility is to make sure that they have enough work to do. So in some cases, we reallocated labor, and instead of somebody working in AP, they were now working in AR. Or somebody that was working on this technology within IT was now shifted over here because we had somebody that was maybe underproductive here, and we had somebody that was overworking over here. So we had those opportunities to have those, again, courageous conversations there. And by doing so, we were able to reduce the headcount and the resources where it made sense, but more importantly, reallocate resources to where we found that we needed additional horsepower, whether it was sales, IT, AP. It was not just isolated to any given role, it was across the organization.
Awesome. I would imagine with just the continued and fast pace of the introduction of AI tools, that use case becomes all the more, present in sort of the way that you look at this data, right? I mean, the expectation, I'm sure, for many of the people listening will be that the introduction of AI should certainly alleviate some of the burden, but then how are you going to reallocate that work, or where are you going to introduce new work, and who has the capacity to take it on? And so I think that the fact that you already have that use case well in play puts you in a good position as you introduce some of those new pieces of technology. One of the things that I want to make sure we cover, John, and I know we're in the last third of our time here, is, when we talk about something like ROI, it's not lost on me, as I lead over 9,000 customers on a daily basis, that investment is more than just a cost of technology, right? And we don't hide that. I think that there are a lot of things that need to happen to make a technology successful. What are some of the key investments and the key activities that you believe need to happen alongside the implementation of a solution like ActivTrak to help ensure its success? What advice would you give other executives that are looking to bring on a solution like this, beyond perhaps communicating to the workforce, which I think you made that one, pretty clear, but what else would you suggest?
Yeah, the communication is the key. I think that's the most important one. Closely behind it is just having that clearly defined policy on how you're going to use this data. It cannot be used as a weapon against your employees. You will fail miserably. You will destroy the culture of your organization. And we're very proud that we've been able to maintain that while still having a tool like this in place. So it's making sure that whether it's abstracting people from it and then having sort of those thresholds and then alerting people about it, whether it's being very transparent by using some of the features like exposing it to employees directly so that they can see where their time is going and sort of self-manage. Whatever your particular company culture makes sense, I would say just have that policy in place and then adhere to it. If you say you're not tracking and then you are tracking, or if you say that you're not going to use it for this purpose and then a manager uses it for that purpose, you are destined to fail. I think in these types of scenarios, you need to be open and honest within your employee handbook, within your communication to existing employees, to new employees as they're coming into the organization. Even as part of the hiring process, you can use this as a differentiator in the hiring. High capacity people, they want to be measured. They want to know that they're not walking into an organization where two people are underproductive and two people have the backs of the entire company, or the entire company on their backs. So you can use it even as a recruiting tool to say, hey, you get to work from home. All these other companies, including big tech companies, are bringing people back to the office as mandatory. We're not that. We want you to do your job, and we're going to enforce our policy to do that. So I think that the big thing is communication, policy enforcement, and then just living up to the commitments that you made to your employees.
Awesome. Appreciate that. I know Megan has, sourced some questions, and so I want to make sure that we have time for those, Megan. So this is sort of my cue to you to make sure that you've got those teed up. But before we do that, John, anything I haven't asked you that you're maybe looking forward to sharing today, or do you feel like you've kind of, you've gotten the opportunity to hit the highlights? I'd hate to keep you from anything you were eager to share.
I would just say start with the basics. We've gotten more sophisticated over time, but just starting with the simple metric of this line of unproductive time and greater, we're going to have a conversation. You can break it down lower. You can start to compare it against your HR times. You can start to look at the types of websites that they're doing. You can find out my salespeople should be spending 50% of their time in Salesforce and 30% of their time in Outlook and look for variations. Those are complicated times. They take analysis, and then you have to act on those. I'd say the most important thing is start with the basics and build from there rather than try to boil the ocean in a day.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Megan, any other questions that we fielded?
We do have a few questions. So we have one around access and giving employees access. Do you think giving employees access is the best approach, or should we limit it to our leaders? I know, John, you shared that you kind of, kind of cut down on what exactly is shared and all of that. But what do you think is the best approach? I mean, obviously you've got the approach that you have, but did you kind of get there? Like, was that a journey or did you start there? Just can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think it really comes down to the culture of your organization. I think the larger the company, the harder it is going to be to maintain a culture where the managers and leaders are keeping their fingers out of it, admittedly. So I think if you're a smaller organization, being more transparent and having this sort of roll out to everybody, and you can get everybody in one big conference room and say, hey, we're rolling this tech out, and here's what's going to happen, and here's the reports you're going to get. I think you could do that. I think in an organization like ours, where we have 20 locations and 650 employees across the company, and let's say 75 to 85 supervisors, I think it becomes too difficult to manage each individual person and each individual personality involved there. So for me, in our company, it was best to sort of hold that information tight and have those sort of stepping stones or that metric that dictated that there'd be basic information provided. But every company culture is different. And I would say, understand your company culture and roll out what's best for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that makes sense. Of course, we have a question around AI. And I think it's a pretty generic question, so I'll leave it open to you on how you want to answer and interpret. But to what extent can AI contribute to ROI?
Yeah, great question. I mean, if it's related to ActivTrak, I'd love to see the roadmap at some point that Gabriela can put together for us on what AI and ActivTrak can do together. For me right now, we have an AI strategy, and right now AI there's thousands of websites that are AI, and all of them have different use cases around what they're doing with the data that you put in there. So I think in terms of the ROI for AI, I would say have a strategy defined and then make sure you're communicating that strategy for your team. I would AI for AI's sake. I don't think you're going to get that ROI, and I think you're going to get inconsistency and you're going to get hallucinations that ultimately could make some bad business decisions. We are embracing AI with open arms, but we're doing so in a controlled way, and we're making sure that people are accessing AI sites where we have enterprise agreements, where we know that the data isn't being shared outside the company and isn't being used to train the model for our competitors or the open market.
Mm-hmm. Gabriela, did you have anything to expand on from an AI perspective, from an ActivTrak point of view, or anything you're doing with customers?
I appreciate John's initial reaction as well. Very, very broad, right? There are a lot of different ways to answer this question. There are two things that I think is important for today's audience, that if we combine John's guidance to start with the basics, with the fact that you've now got the ability using ActivTrak to understand what AI tools are being used and where across your organization, my guidance is to do two things. One, first and foremost, ensure that those who are adopting AI tools, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever that might be, are tools that have been sanctioned by your organization as safe. And by safe, I mean, not only can it be used, but also guardrails around what can be placed into that tool is just so essential. And so having some sort of visibility into how across your 10,000 person organization, who's using what, is very key. And ActivTrak can do that for you very quickly. The other piece is, as you're making major investments into AI tools, is it having an impact on people's productivity? Is their day getting shorter? Is their day getting longer because now they're more engaged and they're doing the fun work they actually like and they're not doing the administrative work? What are they using AI for, and are they is a team of 10 people all adopting that tool, or are only 60% of them adopting that tool, and why are the other four not? And so I think those are two really basic use cases that if you're a customer today and you're not using it for those use cases, please reach out and make sure that you feel like confident as if you can. And if those of you who are considering ActivTrak, there's very clear ROI on the mitigation of the risk that your organization sustains by not having that level of visibility.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, John and Gabriela. We are at time. That was a wonderful session. I did have a quick poll for our audience because I'm very curious what you thought of the session. If you'd like to see more sessions like these, I think we've only done one other one like this, and so I'd really love to know, what you thought of it, if you enjoyed it. And then the other thing is are there other topics you'd like to see, whether that's a session like this? Or if it's anything around the product or even thought leadership, we would really love to get that feedback from y'all so we can incorporate that into our roadmap. So if y'all could just take a few minutes just to give us some feedback there, and then we will go ahead and wrap this up. As a reminder, we will send out the recording of this session in the next day or so. And we'll also send you some other related resources along. So check your inbox. That email that you registered with is the one that you should check. And I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this poll up. So again, John, Gabriela, thank you so much for your time today. And everyone
Of
in the
course.
audience, thank you so much. Great questions. And looking forward to the next one.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Megan.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.